Hey everyone, so I thought I would describe what the tools in Dehancer do in a very simple way because I didn't do that in my review deliberately because I didn't want it to be a tutorial. I wanted it to be an honest review of how I think the product functions. And for those of you that were curious and want to see how the product functions and how the actual tools inside the product function, I wanted to separate that into this video right here. So this isn't a tutorial on how to color grade. This is me showing you how these functions inside of Dehancer work. Hopefully that allows you to have a better understanding and makes you more comfortable purchasing it, or maybe you have it already and you want to know how these tools work from my perspective as somebody who's been color grading for a while. So without over explaining more, let's just jump right in. When you first bring Dehancer in, you're gonna see the input, and the input is gonna be where you tell Dehancer what type of footage you're using or what type of color space you're working in. This footage is ProRes and it's in Rec 709, so I plugged in the source as Rec 709. However, you can use DaVinci Wide Gamut, and you can also plug in a camera manufacturer of your choosing based off of what camera you have. Making Dehancer aware of this makes it so much easier to do everything, and you can't skip this part. You have to do this, or the plugin's not going to work the way you want it to. Inside of the input, we can also change the exposure, temperature, tint, and add defringing. If you've been color grading for a little bit, you know what all this does, but for those of you that might not be as experienced, exposure changes the brightness, temperature will either warm up or cool off the image. Tint changes if there's a green or a magenta cast, and the defringe down here, I actually had to look this up, will remove chromatic aberration because it will actually interfere with the halation and the bloom features in this plugin, but I will get to those in a while. Moving down to the negative film, you can plug in whatever negative film of your choosing. Now, because this is film emulation and this is digital, we can simulate a whole bunch of different possibilities. When you first load Dehancer in, it's going to be defaulted to Kodak Vision 250D. This has 3 different exposures, like built in, or you can change the slider and park it wherever you want. But pulling it left and right will change the color properties of the footage, and you're just gonna have to figure out what you like to see, because this is a creative adjustment and different films have different reactions to different types of light and how you exposed, and whether your image was cold or warm coming straight out of camera. So I can't sit here and tell you what the best thing to use is, but loading this straight in, Kodak Vision 250D was designed for daylight, and it's working very well with the image I'm currently working with right now because there's a lot of daylight coming in from the window. So I'm not going to make any further adjustments to this. We're going to leave this be. We're going to move down to the film developer. Now this is going to change the characteristics of the negative. Now I'm going to skip this because when I read the actual information in the PDF file that Dehancer gave me, they said you might want to go to the expand and the print options right off the bat. Why is that? Because the expand and the print options are going to affect your image on the way out, and then you could make some adjustments to the negative on the back end and the compression, and it's just a lot easier to do it that way. So we're going to get some contrast going by changing the black point. As you can see on the scopes, it's just moving how far down that black point is. And then the white point, we're just going to park this wherever we want. Since this is a bright image, I'm going to bring it up here. If you're seeing color shifts, you can change the color mode to just Luma. If you're seeing an annoying color shift, I usually keep this at normal. I haven't come across any footage where I would need to put it on Luma, but this option is here just in case you have that problem. Then we're going to go to the print. This is going to affect your finalized print colors on the way out. Now, you're probably not going to use linear and Cineon film log, but I'll go ahead and tell you what these do anyways. Linear is going to bypass the printing process. Cineon film log is going to ship out the image in a film log color space. That is for other workflows. You're probably not going to touch this. What we're going to focus on is going to be Fujifilm, Kodak, and Kodak Endura glossy paper. Fujifilm and Kodak will put the respective color profiles of those film stocks on the way out. But if you want to have that contrast still and not have any sort of color casts put on your image on the way out, you can choose Kodak Endura glossy paper. And I like this because it puts a healthy amount of contrast on the image on the way out. Now, this is why I said you need to bounce straight over here, because I'm going to change the black point ever so slightly so that we're not clipping anywhere. Now, moving back down here to the print, you can change the exposure, the tonal contrast, the color density, and the saturation. These are all creative adjustments. These adjustments in the input are meant to shape the image coming into Dehancer, and then these ones that we're currently working on right here where the print is are going to be creative adjustments. So we can change the creative contrast and the color density, and it's going to be a lot more heavy on the reds, just a disclaimer. And we can change the saturation. So if you wanted to keep the print in the negative, but you didn't want it to be in color, you just wanted to make it a black and white version, you could totally do that right here. Just change the saturation to 0. Or you can restrict it to give yourself a low contrast, low saturation aesthetic, which I personally like a lot. Then we can move back to the film developer. Now the film developer is going to be the same as what's underneath the print right here. It's going to change the characteristics of the film negative that we have. You can change the contrast right here on the film negative. You can change how that contrast is corrected with gamma correction. We can change the amount of color separation we're getting from those contrast adjustments, and we can also apply a color boost. Now, I'm not certain if this works the same way as the color boost in the primaries, color bars, and the wheels work. However, I think this is nice because it applies a healthy amount of richness to the image. So if I wanted to bring this up just a little bit, you can see how you could go overboard with this, but adding ever so much, like about at the 20 mark right here, it just gives the image a little bit more life and richness, and I just like how that looks. So I'm just gonna leave that. Now we're gonna move down to film compression. Now film compression is going to affect the top end of your image, and it's gonna try and smooth out those highlights the same way that film would react, because film is very tolerant of very bright light sources, more tolerant in fact than digital film. This isn't giving you more dynamic range, but it is simulating, especially in the windows right here, the roll off in those highlights, so they could seem a lot more smooth. Film has a lot of color density and micro contrast, but also the image isn't stretched out on the top and low end of the dynamic range of your camera very harshly. It makes the image a lot more milky in the highlights. You can leave this off if you want, but enabling it and dialing in this information right here will allow you to change how much of an impact and how much separation and roll off you get from these highlights. So we're just gonna leave this on, and we're gonna move down, and we're gonna go to color head. This is gonna do two things. Color head is going to change the color cast on your film. So if I want to add cyan to this image, I could just drag down on the red slider. Let me enable this real quick. I forgot to enable it. Dragging down just puts cyan into the image, but you can do this one of two ways. It gives you different ways of doing this. I can add cyan by dragging down and taking red out, or I can add blue and I can add green, and you'll get two different types of reactions, but that's totally up to you. These are creative adjustments. So if I wanted to put a cyan cast on the image, I can actually just drag down on this. Cool, we have the cyan cast. Then we can add our split toning in down here. This split toning is separated into the shadows, midtones, and highlights. You can change how the exposure is preserved, and you can change the final impact. You can cool off the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Now I'm doing a little staircase effect right here just to showcase this, but you can see if I pull up my vector scope that we're getting a lot of bias in the blue and cyan. Like I said, circling back, color head puts an overall color cast on the image, a lot similar to printer lights in DaVinci Resolve, and the area down here where you affect the tones of the shadows, midtones, and highlights is where you do your split tone. That concludes the parts that manipulate the color. Everything down here is going to be either a utility or a texture-based part of the plugin. Film grain does exactly what you think it does. However, the cool part about Dehancer is that you can customize it. Now, a little bit of more advice right here. The film type right here. The negative is going to be a lot more coarse and rough, like real life film, and positive is going to be a lot softer on your image based off the documentation that I was reading. Also, analog right here is going to be the higher quality of grain, whereas noise is going to be a lower resolution simulation type of grain. This can be good for dithering the image and removing some of the fidelity from the sharpness. However, if you want the actual film grain look, I would leave it on analog. And that's pretty much it. Everything else you can dial in right here. There's also presets you can use as well. And one final piece of advice, if you'll notice on some of the presets on the grain itself, when you first load it in, Chroma is going to change the chromatic value of the grain. So if you want grain that's a lot like the overlays that you probably got from websites, you want to just crank this down. If you want grain that's just gray and affects the texture of the image and doesn't manipulate the colors as much and cause color casts to act all funky. Then we're going to go to halation. Halation is going to be scattering on the edges of the image. It's going to be more of a red cast. And you're also going to see when you load in the presets that there's going to be this no remjet option. I don't even know if I'm butchering the way you're supposed to pronounce that, but that basically, the remjet or whatever this was, is a filter that stops halation from happening as harshly. So if you choose the option that doesn't have it, you're going to get something a lot more harsh. Now I had to change the overall exposure of the image, but you can see, yes, there we go. If I crank this up and down, you're gonna see some spillage of like a red-orange cast coming off the edges of the image. Some people go overboard with this, and that's cool. I like to keep this a little bit tame, but this is another cool part of the emulation because this halation looks a lot better than the one that's inside of DaVinci Resolve right out the gate. Now, to be fair, this is a lot more processor intensive. The one in DaVinci Resolve is a lot more tuned for DaVinci Resolve and requires a lot more tuning. But this one, as far as something you could just, click one of these presets and just go with it, is going to work a lot better and look a lot nicer. Now, moving on to bloom, I probably didn't choose the best image for this, but this is going to change how the light scatters across surfaces. So let's see if we could get a preset right here that works on this table. Ah, yes, at the coffee mug right here. So subtle, but you can see how it's affecting how the light is scattering and wrapping around this mug when I go back and forth on this amplify right here. Totally up to you whether you want to use this. Now let's go to film damage and film breadth. Film damage is going to do what you think it does. You can customize it. I think it's pretty cool. You could put dust, scratches, and hairs on the screen and dial in how much you want here. Not a lot of technical stuff going on right there. You either turn it on, turn it off, and then dial in whatever you want. Now, film breadth is going to be a little bit more interesting because film breadth is simulating how the emulsion on different parts of film sometimes were not congruent. So it can change the actual exposure of the image. You know what? I'm just going to play it. So you can see a flicker, and I put the period for 1, so every frame it's going to change, but it's kind of simulating how some of the film strips wouldn't be like all the others, and the light would be flickering because the exposure would be changing based off of how the emulsion was handled on each one of the film strips. And I don't know if it was considered a defect or if it was something that was just normal. I just know that this looks kind of aesthetic if you dial it back and you reduce the impact just a little bit, just like that. Next, we're gonna move on to gate weave. Gate weave is simulating how the film strips being pulled across where they were being exposed to the light sometimes wasn't completely straight, and it would cause the image to shake a little bit. Now I'm gonna go to the customize option and change the X and Y all the way up so you can see that it actually causes the image to shake ever so slightly. Now you can change the impact to kind of dial it back, but you can see how having just a little bit of this can be a little bit more immersive, just like adding the film breadth. Now overscan is going to be those things that you see on those overlays that we saw a long time ago. This is just going to plug in a secondary scan that went on top of the finalized print. Let me just turn this on. It's going to be the black borders that you see, and you could change the orientation and the perforation mode. You could change it to a positive, so you get a white square right here, or a negative to get a black square. You could change the shape of the gate to be sharp, rounded, normal, or just completely leave it off and just have the punch hole right here. You have an assortment of different presets to choose from, and you can also flip or uncheck mark this static gate right here, and that will make the actual borders shift a little bit. And you can also defocus the edges of this as well. It's kind of neat how this works. Very cool. Oh, on top of that, before I move on to the next part, you can change the orientation of your footage. So if you want to fit it inside of the frame a different way, you could do that as well. Moving on to Vignette, this was considered a defect in lenses back in the day, but it also can be used to draw a lot of attention to the center of the screen. A negative value will darken the edges, a positive value will brighten the edges, and you can change how it's feathered. If you turn on mask mode, you can see how the changes are being made when you change the aspect ratio and where the center's at on this. Oh Lord. Yeah, you can change where the center's at essentially. You could also change the size, and this is easy to use. You could just change the size and shape of it and just darken the areas of the screen that you want. Very simple, very effective. Now we're going to the utility parts of this plugin. So now the next part is going to be the monitor, and it's kind of neat. You're going to want to disable all the tools on another instance of Dehancer, and we're going to want to use it on the back end of your workflow. But you can enable false color, and for those of you that don't know what false color is, because I'm pretty sure everybody that has seen it before that uses a video monitor knows what this does, it shows how much light all the parts of your image are getting and shows you which parts are at risk of clipping on the bottom end and the top end, on the highlights and the shadows. Now, it's better to use this by itself because you just kind of want a simple way to reference this and turn this on and off. And using it with everything else is just kind of counterintuitive. They do have a separate plugin if you want to download a separate plugin just for this by itself, if you would like to, on the Dehancer website, but it's also integrated into the actual tool itself of the pro version. Now, it also has a clipping indicator And if I go ahead and I turn off Dehancer Pro because this has some compression going on and it's not allowing the image to clip on the top end, I'm gonna enable this, and then I'm gonna go up right here and I will see where my image is clipping in red in the highlights. And if I bring it down, it'll show where my image is clipping in the shadows. Now, you don't have to use this, but it is a great utility, and I would recommend, if you don't have Dehancer, to go and get this tool off their website independently and just use it like that. Moving on to the output, you can use this as an opacity slider. You can bring this up and down to change how much of the actual film emulation that you have basically made makes it through to the final output, and you can tone it down right here. Not that crazy. Here's the cool part right here. So since this program is a little bit intensive, you might want to make a LUT out of the color information that you did up here using your film negative and your finalized print and your color head and your split toning and all that, and save it for later. And you can change that into a LUT file. Now, there's two options. The small version is going to be for viewing on a monitor or on your camera, and the normal version is going to be used for color grading on your computer. Down on the bottom, there's in the options right here, we have the quality. This is going to affect the image fidelity and how everything is being processed and how high quality it is to you basically viewing it. I can only see using high on very sensitive shots where the halation and the texture tools might need a little bit more love and care, but most of the time you're going to leave this on normal. There's also an option on the bottom down here to disable all of the tools all at once if you'd like to, but this is more of an option, so you can start with a clean slate and then turn on tools as you go. Otherwise, hitting Control-D on your keyboard and deactivating is a much faster way of reviewing how your stuff looks before and after. And that about does it. That's about everything from top to bottom explained. If anybody has any questions regarding how any of this works that I may have skipped over, or if you'd want any personal help, you feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram or just leave a comment on YouTube. I try to respond to everybody. And with that being said, you guys all have a wonderful rest of your day.